Kept you waiting, huh? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my analysis of Death Stranding's Video Game Awards 2017 trailer. Death Stranding was far and away my most anticipated world premiere at the event, and Kojima delivered in spades with an 8 minutes long extravaganza of cryptic Lovecraftian sci-fi beauty. As with any Hideo Kojima trailer, there are a lot of hidden clues and hints littered throughout, worth scrutinizing with a fine tooth comb, and you know me, I can't resist an attempt to connect all the dots. Keep in mind though, even after spending weeks analyzing the new footage, I don't have all the answers, and we likely won't until the game finally launches. But I do think that if you pay attention, you will see that a number of lingering questions are answered in this trailer, and it's these answers that I look forward to presenting. Anyway, there is a lot to talk about, so without further ado, let's dive right into it.
Once there was an explosion, a bang which gave birth to time and space. Once there was an explosion, a bang which set a planet spinning in that space. Once there was an explosion, a bang which gave rise to life as we know it. And then came the next explosion.
The trailer opens with dialogue from Norman Reedus' character Sam, who talks about 4 explosions that shaped the universe as we know it. Now, if you watched my last Death Stranding video dedicated to this topic, then you'll know that from what I've determined, the first explosion refers to the Big Bang from 13.7 billion years ago that gave birth to time and space. The second explosion refers to supernovas that created matter that coalesced into planets throughout the course of hundreds of millions of years. And the third explosion refers to an event from 500 million years ago known as the Cambrian explosion, when life rapidly diversified and evolved into what we see today. However, a few of you also suggested the possibility that the second explosion might actually be referring to an event called the Theia Impact, also known as the Big Splash. The hypothesis goes that about 4.5 billion years ago, an astronomical body the size of Mars named Theia collided with Earth, resulting in a huge chunk of debris separating itself from Earth that eventually formed into what we know today as the Moon. But more pertinent is how, according to the hypothesis, this kind of impact influenced Earth's orbit around the Sun, which falls in line with Sam's statement on how the second explosion set a planet, likely referring to Earth, spinning in that space. So while supernovas created planets, it was the Theia Impact, or the Big Splash, that set the Earth and Moon spinning in its current state. With all said and done, perhaps a more accurate label for the first 3 explosions that Sam refers to in the trailer might be the Big Bang, the Theia Impact, and the Cambrian explosion. From there, through dialogue that he finishes at the end of the trailer, Sam hints at a 4th explosion. This 4th explosion most likely refers to the fictional events of Death Stranding itself, but whereas the other 3 explosions resulted in some form of creation, the 4th one will apparently be our last. As for what form this cataclysm will take, well, that's just the question, isn't it? Whatever it is, the 4th explosion is substantial enough that Sam is comparing it to the Big Bang, the Theia Impact, and the Cambrian explosion, all of which shifted the tides of existence itself. My guess is that it has something to do with the arrival of interdimensional beings who can somehow blur the line between life and death, but more on that later. Let's now proceed by diving into the trailer's many noteworthy visual elements. Much like the previous 2 trailers, once again, we open with a panning shot of a ground that's littered with dead crabs. However, this opening separates itself in 2 ways. 1. Unlike in the first 2 trailers, none of the dead crabs in this one have any black strands or umbilical cords protruding out of them. This likely has in large part to do with how, according to Kojima, the events of this new trailer actually takes place the earliest in the game's chronology, just shortly after the game's prologue section. 2. Unlike in the last 2 trailers, in this one, amidst all the decay, we actually see some life for once, specifically in the form of plants. However, something bizarre is happening here. For some reason, they are emerging from the ground, blooming and wilting all in a matter of seconds, as if we're watching their entire life cycle in time-lapse. This can actually be attributed to the rain, which Kojima has confirmed to be a phenomenon called timefall. For some reason, the rain in this world has the supernatural capabilities to affect the flow of time on living matter, or more specifically, accelerate it. We'll see more of timefall's effects later in the trailer. As the camera keeps panning, we eventually see that Sam's right leg is smeared with blood, suggesting that it was injured during the crash that preceded the events of this trailer. We are then shown Sam lying on the ground in a fetal position, not too dissimilarly from the first trailer, to symbolize birth, or perhaps in the case of this game, rebirth. Attached to Sam's left shoulder is a strange device that somewhat reminds me of a Walkman, with cables that are very reminiscent of 3.5mm headphone connectors. As for what it does, the inscription here tells us that it's a dust, mud, and water seal that requires periodical inspection. So it looks like the device's main function is to power or control aspects of the protective gear that Sam is wearing to keep the hazardous timefall rain and water away from Sam's flesh. Other labels we can see here include this M2047R4 inscription, as well as the numbers 0914137 inscribed on the protective gear's chest region, neither of which seem all that significant. Also interesting to note is this plastic or metallic frame that wraps itself around Sam's hood, which likely helps keep it in place during turbulent weather or rough conditions. Aspects of this contraption are likely controlled by this dust, mud, and water seal device, as noted by how one of its cables connects to Sam's hoodie. The trailer then continues as Sam finally comes to, and as he struggles to get up, we are shown a very clear shot of a logo labeled Porter, which is perhaps a private company that Sam works for that was contracted by the United Cities of America's Bridges Government Organization. It's worth noting that the word porter means a person employed to carry luggage and other loads, so a carrier of sorts, which hints that Sam's job is likely to help Bridges transport something somewhere. As for what that something is, we get a brief look at it as the camera pans towards the ravaged, tipped-over truck. Some kind of mummified corpse, which we'll get a better look at later on. Also worth noting are these 3 pillars in the distance. Their purpose is unclear, but they do look like artificially made structures. Another artificial structure can be found here in the distance over this small hill as the camera swivels a little further. From this angle, we can also see a crew member who has also been thrown off board from the truck. The only way that both Sam and this crew member could have been thrown so far from the pickup truck is if they were sitting in the cargo bay before disaster struck. Why would they be back there during the ride? Likely to preside over this mummified corpse that they're transporting. As the camera swivels back to Norman and after he picks himself up, it's possible to make out what seems to be a dream catcher dangling on Norman's back. If it looks familiar to you, that's because it's very reminiscent of the Bridges logo that Kojima showed during E3 2017, featuring the same pentagonal web-like shape. Fun fact about dream catchers, they originated from the Ojibwe Native American culture. The word for dream catcher means spider, hence why they're woven to look like webs. The most common interpretation of their purpose is that they're hung to catch bad dreams and protect children from nightmares, hence why they're often hung over cradles and things of that nature. But another interpretation is that dream catchers symbolize unity among the various indigenous nations. Regardless, either interpretation ties into the idea of the rope, which according to Japanese author Kobo Abe, who Kojima took inspiration from for this game, was the second tool that mankind invented to connect and protect things that are important to them, with the first tool being the stick to keep harmful things away. Now, whether this dream catcher is just the thematic visual element, or whether it has story or gameplay implications remains to be seen, but there is a strong emphasis placed on it throughout the entire trailer. Perhaps even more eye-catching is the contraption Sam is wearing on his back that the Dreamcatcher is tied to, which is very reminiscent of the astronaut backpack that Ludens carries. While they're different enough in design and seem to serve different functions, there's a clear visual parallel between Sam and Ludens that's hard to ignore. Hell, the visual parallels between the two began before Norman Reedus was revealed to be in Death Stranding, and before the game was even announced. Just looking at the eyes behind Ludens' mask, people immediately recognize that the mystery man looks like Norman Reedus. Kojima keeps insisting that Ludens is just the Kojima Productions mascot, who has nothing to do with Death Stranding, but I should also remind you that Kojima has stated that Ludens represents the players, and Norman has said that Kojima told him that players won't just be playing as him, they'll be him. So if Kojima says that both Sam and Ludens are the players, then logic dictates that Sam and Ludens have to be the same entity. But it's all theoretical at this point, though the visual likeness between Sam and Ludens is undeniable. Anyway, back to the trailer. Another device that Sam is wearing is this currently deactivated shoulder-mounted device, which we'll see in action later on. As the camera swivels towards the left, one more device worth highlighting is this brick-like machine attached to Sam's left hip. I'll come back to this a bit later, but keep in mind that this exists. The trailer then sees Sam approach the mummified corpse that him and his crew were transporting, which is securely wrapped and strapped in a body bag with a seal that's labeled Bridges. Immediately eye-catching is how the face section of the body bag is covered in a golden-colored soot that's been smeared to resemble a skull face. While its function remains a mystery, there are definitely symbolic implications at play. Kojima seems to have borrowed this idea from the ancient tradition of adorning mummies with golden death masks as a means to usher the spirit of the deceased to the afterlife. Famous cases of these death masks include the golden burial mask of Tutankhamun from ancient Egypt and the mask of Agamemnon from ancient Greece. Also worth noting is that underneath this corpse's golden mask, there looks to be black liquid seeping through, possibly indicating that whatever this body bag was meant to seal is now leaking out. Oh, and before we move on, this shot is the perfect opportunity to reminisce on this tweet that Kojima posted back in March 2017. Remember how Kojima attached these photos of a diorama he had made alongside the message, "I'm not playing around, part of my job"? Well, it turns out that he wasn't kidding, because this diorama shows the exact same scene as the one in this trailer, except with Sam being represented by this Hannibal Lecter figurine, the corpse by this baby figurine, and the two Bridges crew members by Will Graham and Jack Crawford from Hannibal, both of who work for the FBI in the show. So some parallels and some discrepancies. But yeah, judging by the date on this tweet, this cutscene was seemingly conceptualized at least 9 months before the new trailer was premiered, which is really interesting. Moving on, the camera pans towards the tipped-over truck, at which point these light blue halos on the back of this semi-futuristic pickup truck's 4 wheels become clearly visible. Similar lights can also be found on the interior of the handcuffs that both Sam and Del Toro's character wore in the first 2 trailers. Now, it's apparent that the pickup truck is property of Bridges, judging by how the logo can be found on the detached car door as well as the front of the truck. So perhaps the handcuffs featuring a similar blue light are also Bridges' developed technology. The camera eventually makes its way to 2 crew members whose shoulder sleeve insignia confirm that they're members of Bridges. These armbands also tell us that they're part of a unit called Corpse Disposal Team 6, which gives us a pretty good idea of why they're out here in the first place. One of the crew members is up and about, but the other one, I'm guessing the driver, is pinned down by the truck. Notice how aside from the blood spewing from where the pickup truck impacted his waist, it's also possible to make out dry smudges of black liquid throughout his protective suit, suggesting that the black substance may be a common hazard with this job. It's also possible to make out that the injured man is wearing what looks to be some kind of metallic bracelet that's currently displaying a yellow light. His teammate is also wearing one, but his is showing a blue light. As you'll see throughout the trailer, these bracelets seem to act as health indicators, with blue representing healthy, yellow representing injured, and red representing critical. And my guess is that these bracelet colors will also be represented in the DualShock 4 LED lights. Now, oddly enough, Sam is the only one who isn't wearing one of these bracelets, perhaps because they're only issued to members of Bridges. Something else that the healthy Bridges crew member is equipped with is a baby incubator, the same one we saw Del Toro's character carry in the second trailer. Later on, it will become apparent that the baby residing within the incubator is what both powers this shoulder-mounted mechanical arm and controls it to detect the interdimensional beings. I believe that the mechanical arm is nothing but an analog interface that the baby can use to relay information that the user can interpret. As the mechanical arm comes to life and alerts that something is approaching, an ominous noise emanates before the man says, "Shit, they're here."
Shit, they're here.
And then we see the time fall rain take effect again, this time on human flesh. Wrinkles rapidly begin to form on the injured man's face, and his teeth begin to decay as we witness him undergo the effects of accelerated aging, much like the plants we saw at the beginning of the trailer. Unlike Sam and the healthy Bridges member, who have functioning hoods shielding their faces from time fall, the injured man's protective hood is nowhere to be found, leaving his face exposed to the time-altering rain. And while this is happening, the other man screams, "I can't control it," while desperately attempting to pull his teammate out of the truck that's got him pinned, but to no avail.
I can't get you out!
The camera then pans back up to show that the mechanical arm is now facing towards Sam's direction, indicating the direction from which otherworldly creatures are approaching from. Then, we learn Norman's character's name for the first time as the Bridges crew member with the mechanical arm shouts,
Sam!
Sam then responds with, "Shut up and don't even breathe."
Shut up. Don't even breathe.
From this angle, it's possible to make out some more wreckage from the truck, like the front bumper and a fire extinguisher. The camera then swivels back to the Bridges crew members, both of who immediately cover their mouths as fear begins to overtake all other instincts. From this angle, we can see that on his right shoulder is another shoulder sleeve insignia labeled CDT, which likely stands for Corpse Disposal Team. Another subtle but very important detail is that tears begin rolling down this man's face despite the fact that he isn't crying. This isn't the only instance of this strange, spontaneous physical reaction either, as we'll see later on. This camera angle also gives us a very clear look at the bracelet. Now, at a glance, they might look different from the handcuffs seen in past trailers, but careful observation confirms that they're actually exactly the same. There are two visual differences in these cuffs that may throw you off. The first difference is that it appears as though, unlike the handcuffs in the first two trailers, there is no second cuff linked to the bracelet, but actually there is. If you look carefully, you will notice that this protrusion is the same two-pronged chain from the handcuffs seen previously, except in this trailer, instead of hanging and dangling, they loop around to show that the second cuff is attached to the same wrist. The injured man is also wearing his handcuffs the same way. You can see the handcuffs chain looping onto the same wrist, where both the thicker first cuff and the thinner second one are attached to adjacent to each other. So for some reason in this trailer we are seeing both bracelets from one handcuff being attached to one wrist. Very strange indeed. Which brings us to the second difference between the handcuffs in this trailer versus past trailers, which is the lights. Now, it's true that we didn't see lights like these being emitted by handcuffs from past trailers, but we did see these two thick protrusions. Turns out that the surface of these two protrusions emit different colored lights, but it's only now in this trailer that we're seeing that feature for the first time. So then the question becomes, why are these lights on in this trailer but not in previous ones? Well, the only thing that changed between previous trailers and this one is that the second thinner cuff is actually being worn by someone. So my theory is that the lights on the first cuff will show the health condition of whoever is wearing the second cuff. In this case, since both Bridges crew members are wearing the second cuffs on themselves, the lights are showing their own health status. But if one were to attach the second cuff to another individual, perhaps we would be able to see that person's health condition. Now, strangely, in the first two trailers, it's the lights on the thicker cuff that are dormant, while the lights on the thinner cuff are lit up, completely opposite of what we're seeing in the new trailer. So in this case, is the second cuff lit up because it's prompting someone to wear it, or are we looking at another type of functionality or connection? Is there more to the second cuff than simply being a health indicator for its wearer? Could it also somehow communicate information beyond the physical realm or across dimensions? I couldn't tell you at this point, but it's worth pondering. Anyway, the bottom line to all this is that the handcuffs seen in the third trailer are exactly the same ones seen in the first and second ones, except this time, instead of seeing the second cuff dangling, both cuffs are being worn by the same person, and the thicker cuff is acting as a health indicator through different colored lights. This man's bracelet is still blue, suggesting that he's still healthy, but if we look at the injured man, not only do we see that he has aged considerably in just a few seconds, his bracelet turned from yellow to red, indicating a critical state, in no small part due to the accelerated aging. As the camera pans back up to show us the mechanical arm, you may notice that it is pinpointing the exact location of the nearby interdimensional being. If you follow the motions of the arm's head, it's possible to see that the spectral entity makes a sudden movement following an ominous guttural sound. From there, the mechanical arm seems to engage in a different mode. Instead of just flapping open and shut, it also begins rotating rapidly, as if to indicate that the interdimensional creature is very close by. I get the sense that this mechanical arm's gameplay function will be akin to Metal Gear Solid's Soliton radar, except players will have to learn the mechanical arm's different behaviors, noises, and modes to gauge their surroundings. Interestingly, the interdimensional being seems to pay no mind to the loud noises that the mechanical arm is emitting, which tells me that these creatures don't hunt by detecting sight or sound, but rather by detecting signs of life. This might explain why Sam previously told his crew members,
"Shut up, don't even breathe,"
since breathing is, of course, one of the clearest indicators of life. As the spectral creature slowly crawls away, notice how precisely the mechanical arm tracks it. It seems likely that players will have to rely on where their mechanical arm is pointing to get through certain action or stealth segments. I can already imagine scenarios in which you're forced to rely on this mechanical arm's various cues, as well as subtle visual and audio hints like handprints and guttural noises to get a bearing of your surroundings and to proceed with caution. Anyway, as the creature continues to move away, if you keep an eye on the mechanical arm, you will notice that after the creature is a certain distance away, it reverts back from rotating to flapping, and once the creature is out of sight, the arm gradually stops moving altogether. So, once again, more indication that this mechanical companion will serve as the player's guide and intel throughout the game. The healthy Bridges crew member then gives Sam the thumbs up to indicate that the threat has passed, and as the camera makes its way towards him, a flash of lightning reveals some moss towards the left side here, seemingly unaffected by the timefall rain. Sam proceeds to get up again, and you can see that the injury on his right leg is causing him to limp a little bit before he gets his bearings. From this angle, we can more clearly make out the frame that Sam's carrying on his back that's reminiscent of Luden's astronaut backpack. Not sure what its functionality is, but one guess is that it might be used to hoist corpses on Sam's back for easier transportation. Now, from the looks of it, this mechanical frame has been used quite a bit, judging by all the stains, rust, and other signs of wear and tear. The camera then pans around Sam to reveal a couple of interesting things. One, the seal on the body bag here is not only labeled Bridges, inscribed next to that is the word danger. 2, we start seeing the corpse violently convulsing as the black liquid, once confined to the face and a few other areas, now spreads throughout the entire body. Along the way, the various ropes holding the mummified corpse begin to snap apart while the golden skull face begins to fade away as particles, eventually culminating in the corpse seemingly completely liquefying into the black substance while leaving behind this golden skull face imprint that dissipates shortly thereafter. The feeling I got from this was that a seal was broken and whatever this body bag was keeping trapped inside has now been unleashed. By who or what exactly? My assumption is this Lovecraftian apparition, who appears moments later looming over Sam. The apparition's face seems to be covered in strands that sway back and forth and are arranged in such a way that they almost look like hair. More strands can also be seen flowing through the fingertips of the apparition's slender hands. Interestingly, it's possible to make out the outline of the hill back here through the apparition's body, suggesting that it may not be fully corporeal in this dimension. Shortly after the apparition's brief appearance, from the pond left by the liquefied corpse, spectral human hands begin to take their first steps. Whatever was once sealed inside the Bridges body bag is now out and about. It seems to me as though the once corporeal flesh has somehow been turned into a spectral being stranded between life and death that now acts as an agent for the otherworldly beings. Now here's something interesting. As Sam backs away and drags his injured leg, the ground beneath suddenly begins to heat up out of the blue. Then, as part of the creature's ghostly handprint converges with the heated area, smoke begins to form as if something is being evaporated. This evaporation is most likely a result of the black liquid interacting with a heated ground. Weirdly, the creature itself seems unaffected by the touch of the heat, suggesting that only the black liquid residue and handprints seem to be able to fully cross to Sam's material world, or the world of the living. As for why parts of the ground become heated all of a sudden, a closer look will reveal that the leg Sam is dragging is bleeding profusely, and anywhere that blood makes contact with the ground is where the heating starts to occur. My take on what's going on here is that we're once again witnessing the effects of timefall. Now, from what I've seen, timefall should only affect living things, so plants or human flesh. Non-living matter such as Sam and crew's protective gear, the crashed truck, and the ground beneath them all seem unaffected by it. But what if living and non-living matter were to meld? What if timefall began having an effect on the ground beneath Sam's leg because it was briefly infused with living matter, Sam's blood, resulting in the ground aging rapidly from the brief time the blood was alive? Now, obviously, ground doesn't age like living things do, but it can undergo a process called the rock cycle. All rocks begin as magma beneath the earth, and as they become expelled onto the surface as lava, they cool down, undergo various processes, and become the earth and ground that we stand on. Then, after some time, that rock undergoes tectonic burial, becomes heated through tectonic friction, pressure, and other processes, and finally undergoes melting to begin the cycle anew. With that in mind, I believe that what we're seeing here is the rock cycle in a time lapse for the brief time that the ground was fused with life before the blood died, stopping at the heating and melting stage. Alright, that's enough Earth science for one day, and I use the term science loosely for this trailer and this game as a whole. One last thing I would like to point out before moving on is that these handprints are pretty damn big. Unless the mummified corpse was LeBron James, there's something not quite human about this death-stranded specter. We can even hear guttural noises once again, suggesting that these creatures might be less human than the handprints might suggest. Then we hear the pinned down Bridges crew member scream in pain, a sign of life that the specter immediately detects. Now notice how currently the healthier crew member's mechanical arm isn't paying mind to the encroaching creature, but once it gets within a certain range, its attention immediately shifts to the handprints. So it looks like the mechanical arm has a specific radius of detection. It's only once these otherworldly beings get within a certain range that the arm will pinpoint them. The radius of detection isn't that far though from the looks of it. Who knows though, maybe the game will offer the ability to customize and upgrade your mechanical arm companion in a variety of ways, including its radius of detection. As the handprints make their way towards the injured man, you can see that he's now aged considerably since we last saw him. He is now blind on his left eye, wrinkles are more prominent, and most of his hair has fallen out. This is definitely not his day. Once the creature gets a hold of him, the healthier man backs away, after which we see the mechanical arm start to go crazy, like it doesn't know where to look. The guy immediately recognizes this behavior, exclaiming that they're now surrounded by the interdimensional beings.
They're surrounded.
While he says that, another apparition briefly appears in the background, and like before, you can see that there are strands dangling from various parts of the humanoid body, including the hands and feet. We then see one more apparition briefly appear towards the left here with very similar features. That's 3 apparitions we have seen now. The camera then swivels to the injured man, who is all of a sudden enveloped by a pond of black liquid that appeared out of nowhere, and this pond seems to be acting like a portal from which these hordes of arms can emerge from to envelop and capture its prey, who has aged enough that even liver spots have started to form on his balding head. After the poor man pleads for help, the camera swivels back to his partner, who has now drawn his weapon. Interesting about this gun is this little rectangular mechanism. Notice how the guy loads the gun's barrel one-handed by brushing the gun against his thigh to flip open and prop up this rectangular piece before thrusting forward to push the gun's slide back. Then, when he hesitantly points his gun to put his friend out of his misery, you can see that the rectangular piece now remains flipped open. So it looks to be some kind of convenient safety or one-handed loading mechanism. Not sure if a gun feature like this actually exists in real life, or if Kojima took creative liberties with this design, but I thought it was a cool thing to point out anyway. The camera then swivels back to the injured man, and if we freeze at just the right moment, it's possible to make out 2 heads peeking out, suggesting that these entities were once people before they got turned into whatever the hell this is. Eventually, the injured man is dragged off in a very visually perplexing moment where the pond itself is moving as if it has a mind of its own. It's like watching a portal between 2 worlds dragging itself across the ground like a speedy slug. Then, after hesitating for a bit, his partner decides to save the poor fellow from what I can only assume would be a world of pain by shooting him in the head, after which the otherworldly pond almost drops dead and everything just stops. From this angle, it's possible to see inside the cargo bay of the pickup truck, where there are what look like deployable wall-mounted seats, where Sam and the remaining Bridges crew member were likely sitting before the crash threw them off board. As the coast seemingly clears, Sam eventually approaches, not long before a strange man steadily floats down from nowhere, and for some reason, only Sam can see him. The other guy seems completely unaware of the new presence. Now, unlike the apparitions we previously saw, this man is definitely corporeal, judging by how when he lands on the truck, the car door sinks to his weight, and you can hear the sound of clanking metal. Strangely, even the loud metallic noise isn't enough to alert the Bridges member. Even the mechanical arm seems unable to detect him, which perhaps suggests that the shrouded figure is less apparition and more flesh, although there is clearly something very supernatural about him. The shrouded figure then proceeds to use a hand gesture that is all too familiar. That is unequivocally very similar to the gesture used by Mads in the second trailer, suggesting that the man behind this golden mask may be none other than Mads Mikkelsen's character. Now, I use words like similar and may because there is a subtle difference between the gesture from the second trailer and the gesture in this new trailer. In the second trailer, Mads points with 2 fingers, whereas the man with the golden skull mask only points with 1. This may seem like a minute detail, but when it comes to Hideo Kojima, the devil is in the details, and no discrepancy can be overlooked. So in my eyes, this could very well be enough to call the shrouded figure's identity into question. For the purposes of this video though, I'll just keep calling him Mads. Let's now proceed to talk about the character's appearance. The thing that immediately struck me is how he's basically wearing a gold version of Luden's mask, once again indicating that the Kojima Productions mascot may be more relevant to Death Stranding than Kojima's letting on. Hell, there is even concept art revealing that Luden's spacesuit was designed by Bridges, so seeing as there are signs that Luden's and Bridges are related, perhaps Mads wearing a gold version of Luden's mask is indication that he too has some kind of relationship to the organization as well, perhaps as a former agent or rogue creation. It's also worth noting that Mads is equipped with the same baby incubator and white umbilical cord that we have only seen equipped on members of Bridges in all 3 trailers. One notable difference, however, is that whereas Bridges incubators have a yellow and black color scheme, for some reason Mads' incubator is green and black. I'll talk about the implications of the green and black color scheme a bit later. Going back to the mask, what's also interesting is that it's reminiscent of the golden skull face smudged on the mummified corpse's face. Whether there is some kind of relationship there between Mads and the corpse, or whether this is all more of a symbolic connection, is hard to say at this point. But as far as symbolism goes, I'd like to go back to what I said before about how these golden skull masks might represent ancient burial rituals, which used what are called golden death masks as a means to usher the dead into the afterlife. Now, for Mads in particular, I'd like to focus on ancient Egypt. And the reason for this is because alongside the golden skull mask, he is also wearing a cloak with an interior that is patterned with gold and black stripes, identically to the burial mask of ancient pharaoh Tutankhamun, which has got a golden face and similar stripes of gold and dark blue that can look black in certain lighting conditions. Now, I don't think the implication here is that Mads is literally Tutankhamun, but there certainly do seem to be tangible undertones of ancient Egyptian culture. Another potential reference is that the green and black apparel might represent the Egyptian god Osiris, who was commonly depicted as a pharaoh with a black-green complexion to symbolize rebirth and resurrection. Osiris was also the Egyptian god of the afterlife, the underworld, and the dead, as was the god of transition, resurrection, and regeneration, all themes that are portrayed one way or another in this trailer. Now, Osiris was also apparently considered a merciful judge of the dead in the afterlife and of the underworld agency that granted all life, including sprouting vegetation and the fertile flooding of the Nile River. The sprouting of vegetation is something we saw displayed in time-lapse at the very beginning of the trailer, and the flooding of the Nile is something we witness every time Matt's character appears. We saw it happen in the second trailer, and we also see it happen later on in the new trailer as well. Another name that Osiris was known for is the Lord of Silence, which Matt's character exemplifies every time he does that shushing gesture. So everything from the golden death mask, the gold and black stripes, the green and black complexion of his attire, to the various associations between Matt's character and Osiris seem to indicate that Kojima may have borrowed heavily from ancient Egyptian lore for symbolic and thematic reasons. Moving on, after Mads does his gesture, 2 things happen. 1. Endlessly long vertical strands hanging from the sky suddenly become visible, and 2. Matt's own mechanical arm comes to life, though this one looks quite different. It almost looks like a sleeker and more advanced version of what everyone else is wearing, like a next-gen iteration of the technology. And the character is even wearing a baby incubator with the artificial umbilical cord attached to operate it. Now, what I find very interesting about Mads is that both times we have seen him, he has acted as what I can only describe to be a technological chameleon who is always one generation ahead. In the second trailer, we saw Mads wearing an American soldier uniform and wielding a rifle in a similar fashion to his skeletal minions, but all of his equipment was more modern and one generation ahead. In this trailer, we see something very similar. Mads is equipped with similar gear and technology as those around him, like the mechanical arm, but his equipment seems one generation more advanced. While I'm not sure about the exact logistics of how Mads can adapt to his surroundings like that, we did see him make his night vision goggles dissipate as if dismissed on command in the second trailer. So if he has the power to dismiss his equipment, who's to say that he can't summon them as well? Could he have the supernatural ability to take one gander at his surroundings and summon the more advanced version of the same technology? Maybe I'm reaching here, but the prospect of Mads being a supernatural chameleon who's just always better equipped than everyone is kind of an interesting prospect. Now, I thought for a while about whether Mads is an ally or an enemy in this scenario, whether he's warning Sam about something, or whether he's there as a proxy for the interdimensional beings, and from where I'm sitting, he's definitely not a friendly. As soon as he makes that gesture, lightning strikes, fog dissipates to reveal strands falling from the sky, and things only get more bizarre and terrifying from there. I feel like he somehow summoned more interdimensional beings or issued some kind of command that triggered an attack. This is further corroborated by how just moments after Mads does his gesture, the mechanical arm immediately changes modes once more, this time turning into something akin to a crosshair, as if telling its user to brace themselves for an attack. So far, we have seen this thing flap open and shut with the presence of interdimensional beings, and we have seen it spin alarmingly when they get too close, but every time it was while the arm's wearer wasn't the target of an attack. But now that he is, it looks like the arm turned into a crosshair in reaction. So I think this third mode indicates that the interdimensional beings are fully alerted by the wearer's presence and have set their sights on them. If we attribute the mechanical arm's flapping and rotating modes as Metal Gear's evasion and caution modes respectively, the arm's crosshair mode would be the equivalent of Metal Gear's alert mode. This is all loosely speaking, of course. I'm not trying to imply that the mechanical arm is a direct adaptation of Metal Gear's enemy status system or anything like that. All I'm saying is that the arm clearly serves a similar purpose of acting as a guide and indicator for player surroundings. Moving on, right after the mechanical arm switches to crosshair mode, the impending danger also causes the incubator to reveal the baby inside, who seems quite agitated. Aside from the mechanical arm, I think the baby's behavior might also be something that players will have to look out for to gauge their surroundings as well. When a clairvoyant baby gets riled up like this, you know shit's about to go down. While all of this is happening, notice how the water level nearby begins to rise, identically to the way it happened to Del Toro in the second trailer, which again may be referencing how the god of death Osiris is often associated with the flooding of the Nile River. Now, in the second trailer, we see the flood happening before Guillermo connects his umbilical cord with the incubator, but as soon as Guillermo does so, because Mads was already near the vicinity and because there is a threat nearby, the baby immediately appears and seems agitated, likely indicating to Guillermo that he was in imminent danger, that he was now the target, that he was in alert mode. In both trailers, we see the baby put their hands up against the inner walls of the incubator as if distraught and trying to say, "Watch out." Now, Guillermo doesn't have the mechanical arm here, but I'm willing to bet that if he did, it too might form into a crosshair shape and enter the equivalent of alert mode. And you can see here that Guillermo understands the implication of the baby's reaction. He seems to have confirmed to himself that his enemies have now set their sights on him, so he looks quite worried after that. Anyway, back to the current trailer, as the baby alerts the man of danger, as the area begins to flood, and as the truck begins to sink into what's becoming black liquid quicksand, he suddenly begins shooting frantically where the mechanical arm is guiding him. Now, I don't think he's actually shooting at Mads, because we saw before that the arm can't detect him, but I think Mads did unleash something that the arm can detect. I get the sense that despite being flesh and blood, Mads somehow seems to be able to interact with the interdimensional creatures, command them even. I can only surmise that Mads is either some kind of human agent for the interdimensional beings, or that he's a human who somehow found a way to control or command the interdimensional beings at his whim. Anyway, going back to the poor Bridges fellow, it's apparent at this point that resistance is futile, as more of the black liquid-soaked humanoids begin grasping and tugging at his legs. Hilariously enough, among them is none other than Hideo Kojima, who hinted via Twitter at one point that he had 3D scanned himself into the game. It's good to see that Kojima hasn't lost his knack for silly Easter eggs and fourth wall breaking moments. Some things just never change. Anyway, the poor man finally resorts to detaching the baby incubator, yelling "run" and throwing it in Sam's direction. Interestingly, this is the first time we've seen the white umbilical cord detached from the end that connects with the user's body. In the second trailer, Guillermo's umbilical cord was only seen detached from the end that connects with the incubator, which made me wonder if the cord was a permanent upgrade to one's body or something. But it looks like both ends of the umbilical cord can be detached by the user. The camera then zooms towards Sam, and as it's doing so, I'd like to pause the trailer right here, where we finally get a good shot of the character's front view. Remember that brick-like device attached to Sam's left hip we talked about earlier? Well, we've got a clear view of it right here, and what immediately stuck out to me is that the device is attached to a black strand that loops into Sam's suit through this flap. It seems as though even this early in the game, Sam is already equipped with the black umbilical cord we saw in the first trailer. As for what the hip-mounted device does, one hint can be spotted in this new poster. Towards the bottom right, the device can be seen plain as day, and inscribed on it is the label C-mount. Now, my theory for what the C could stand for is Caesarean, as in Caesarean section or C-section. It's safe to assume that one end of Sam's black umbilical cord is connected to the center of his cross-shaped Caesarean section scar, where his belly button would be. So it seems quite fitting to call any device on the other end of that connection a Caesarean something, or in this case, the Caesarean mount or C-mount. Judging by the word mount and the familiar yellow and black color scheme, I can only assume that the device might be another way to connect and interface with the mechanical arm. So whereas Bridges uses a direct connection with a thicker white umbilical cord, Sam uses the C-mount device to which Sam's thinner black umbilical cord is connected to. The way that I like to think of these different connectors is that it's akin to how you can use either DisplayPort or HDMI to connect to the same monitor. So the question then becomes, why does Sam have a different way of interacting with the mechanical arm? My first thought was that maybe Bridges and Porter each developed their own way to link the mechanical arm with the incubator, but I get the sense that all technology we have seen in this trailer was developed and issued by Bridges, including the C-mount device. A big hint is that all Bridges technology seem to share the same black and yellow color scheme that the organization also uses for its logo. We can also see this color scheme on the cargo bay of the Bridges pickup truck, on these Bridges issued pouches, on the baby incubator, on the mechanical arm, on Sam's C-mount device, so on and so forth. They all share an aesthetic signature. Furthermore, it is surely no coincidence that only Bridges members have been seen equipped with a baby incubator and a matching white umbilical cord, further corroborating that all the umbilical cord related technology must be made by Bridges and Bridges issued. But again, there's still the question of why was Sam given a different means to interface with his mechanical arm rather than the standard equipment? My theory is that Sam's C-mount device could be a new next-generation interface that was specifically designed for Sam or for a specific group of people with unique attributes. Another important question is, why does Sam already have a black umbilical cord this early in the game? What does it do, and why is Sam unique in this regard? Unfortunately, there are still certain mysteries that can't be resolved yet, so we'll leave it at that for now. With that out of the way, once the camera zooms in all the way to Sam's face, we witness for a second tears rolling down at an unexpected moment. Again. Sam doesn't seem to be crying or anything, it's just some kind of mysterious physical reaction to supernatural surroundings, though I can't put my finger on what the reaction is to. As the camera swivels back, we are shown a couple things. Now that the man has detached the baby incubator, the mechanical arm has completely powered down, save for its flashlight function. This tells us that it was indeed the baby's clairvoyance for otherworldly creatures that controlled the mechanical arm to relay information. We can also see that the man, knowing he's doomed and also having a clear understanding of the horrible things that await if he gets taken alive, points the gun at himself to commit suicide and take the easy way out. Easy Way Out, by the way, is the name of the song used in the second Death Stranding trailer. No doubt hinting at circumstances like these that call for such extreme action. Just as he's about to shoot himself, something yanks his leg in the nick of time and he misses, dropping his gun along the way. The way this man was yanked up like this and the way his right leg is anchored while the rest of his body is flailing makes it look like his right leg fell for some kind of invisible snare trap, as if an invisible rope that's now tied to his right leg is hanging him upside down in this fashion. Now, if this imagery looks familiar, that's because it's very reminiscent of how in the second trailer, a strand ensnares this baby doll's leg and pulls it towards Mads, which may further suggest that Mads had something to do with what's happening to this man right now. Not to mention that all of this only started to happen after Mads did his iconic hand gesture, which triggered something. Anyway, soon after this poor guy's right leg is ensnared by a spectral rope, a sudden shift in gravity and the laws of physics happens. Suddenly, everything starts floating upwards, and while that's happening, the guy desperately tries to reach for his gun so that he can kill himself, but to no avail. In the back here, we can also see the other Bridges crew member, who at least had the good fortune of taking the easy way out. As the camera pans up, we can see that at this point, the man can now freely bend and move his once ensnared right leg, suggesting that it's no longer an invisible rope that's keeping him afloat, but rather the effects of the gravity shift. We can also see that the landscape has now filled with black strands streaming down from the heavens. Now here's where things get real interesting. In a last-ditch attempt, the guy pulls out his knife and starts frantically stabbing himself repeatedly, and as he's doing so, you can see that the lights on his handcuffs go from blue to yellow to red, or from healthy to injured to critical. Yet for some reason, he can't die. Try as he may, he is now death stranded in this mortal coil. I get the sense that this sudden immunity to death came into effect as soon as he was pulled by the otherworldly snare, as soon as he was yanked upside down. I am willing to bet that after that, even if he would have managed to reach for the gun he dropped and shoot himself, it wouldn't have made a difference at this point. I think that's why Sam here doesn't even try to help him. I think Sam might recognize that it's already too late. Either that or Sam's kind of a dick. Speaking of Sam, why he's completely unaffected by the gravity shift is another mystery altogether. Does the dream catcher on his back act like some kind of protective charm? Does Sam have unique supernatural abilities or attributes that we don't know about yet? Is the baby protecting him somehow? I couldn't tell you for sure, but I do have one theory. There are two things that separate Sam from everything that's being affected by the gravity shift. A, he's alive, and B, he hasn't been directly targeted by the otherworldly creatures yet. Everything that's currently floating, whether it's the pickup truck, the debris of rock, the corpses of dead crabs and humans, or the guy who was pulled by the invisible snare trap, is one way or another either non-living matter or death stranded. So maybe it's that simple. Sam and the baby are both still alive and untouched by the interdimensional beings, so the gravity shift has no effect on them. Going back to the guy frantically stabbing himself in futility, who can't die anymore, seeing this made me think of a theory for the second trailer. One of the most prominent things about it was the presence of undead skeleton soldiers wearing American World War II gear. Now, back then, my thought was that these guys were basically zombies, somehow brought back from the dead. But what if what actually happened was that these are all people who, after falling prey to the interdimensional beings, couldn't die and have been death stranded in the world of the living? What if these aren't people who are resurrected from the dead, but rather people who haven't been able to die after all this time? What if the reason they are skeletons has something to do with timefall? Perhaps they were exposed enough to it that their flesh decayed rapidly, leaving behind their skeletal husk while continuing their eternal suffering as slave soldiers. Hell, the second trailer even hints that there might have been rain through the puddles of water on the ground and the upside-down rainbow in the sky. We know at this point that the second trailer takes place later in Death Stranding's chronology than the third trailer, so enough time may have passed that the interdimensional beings have managed to Death Strand an army of people and wash their flesh away through timefall. Anyway, back to the trailer at hand. As the camera pans back to Sam, he proceeds to pick up the baby incubator, and as soon as he does that, even without a direct umbilical connection, Sam's mechanical arm immediately sparks to life and transforms into a crosshair. For some reason, unlike everyone else, Sam can link up with the baby incubator wirelessly. Perhaps this is indication that there is a unique, strong affinity between Sam and this baby, or perhaps this C-mount device that Sam's black umbilical cord is connected to allows for some kind of wireless connection. Maybe one way to look at it is that Bridges' white umbilical cord is akin to a direct LAN connection, whereas Sam's black umbilical cord is akin to Wi-Fi with the C-mount device acting like a modem. A silly analogy perhaps, but that's the only way I can make sense of this. Moving on, as all manner of debris and dead creatures continue their gradual anti-gravitational ascent, another Lovecraftian creature reveals itself, this one colossal in stature. So a couple things to point out here, starting with the fact that this guy is hung like a horse with this umbilical cord, which is going down from his belly and curving left behind his leg. And then there's the thinner strands, the one shooting out of wrists from which hands were seemingly amputated from. Much like the strands streaming down from the sky, this creature's strands and umbilical cords all seem to be embedding themselves into the earth itself. As the camera keeps panning up, we eventually see that in place of a head, this Lovecraftian kaiju has two hands that have been positioned to look like a gaping maw. The two hands, by the way, seem just about the right size to fit onto the creature's amputated wrists. As these hands for head open its jaws, above the creature is the death-stranded fellow who still remains alive, as noted by the sounds of his frantic screaming while he floats to his demise. Eventually, the man is swallowed whole by the creature, triggering a chain of explosions. If we pause at the right moment, it's possible to see that this explosion is very supernatural in nature, emanating these strange electricity-like particle effects. We'll see the aftermath of the explosion later on. As the explosion reaches its climax, Sam is engulfed in white before he gets dumped into an underwater world. Kojima has already confirmed that this is the purgatory world that Sam and the player go to every time they die, so Sam was in fact killed by the explosion. But this isn't game over. In this realm, Sam is neither dead or alive. Kojima compared this limbo state to game over screens with a countdown, except this one is interactive, seamless with the game, and doesn't take you out of the experience at any point. Kojima also confirmed that because of mysterious, unique abilities that Sam possesses, when players die, they can wander outside of Sam's corporeal body in first-person perspective and explore this purgatory world to recover items among other things, aspects of which we'll get a glimpse of a bit later. Now, something I noticed is that Kojima deliberately placed the camera in such a way that we can't tell if Sam's cross-shaped C-section scar from the first trailer is there or not. While it seems like it might not be there at a glance, the scar actually resides quite low on his belly, a region that's just out of the camera's field of view in this trailer. Not sure why Kojima felt it was necessary to keep the scar's presence ambiguous this time, but maybe there is something there that's revealing enough that he felt the need to hide it. As the camera pans around, a handprint forms on Sam's chest, which I'm assuming happens every time Sam dies, like a death counter of sorts. Judging by how his body is already marked with a couple other handprints, this player may have already died a few times, though clearly not as much as the player in the first trailer, who is littered with these handprints. As for what the long-term ramifications of these handprints are is something that Kojima hasn't disclosed yet, so that's a mystery for another day. The camera eventually swivels to show that this underwater world does have a surface from which black strands stream down from the sky like we saw before, but in Purgatory, we actually get some hints as to what they might be, but I'll talk more about that a bit later. From this angle, we can also see a variety of objects ranging from debris of rocks to human corpses floating up this body of water. One of the corpses actually makes it past the water's surface before being swallowed by this Lovecraftian creature like an afternoon snack. The way I see this is that with this being Purgatory, all of these floating bodies are souls that are ready for consumption by creatures that feed off of them on the surface. Interesting to note about these soul corpses is that they're all completely black in color, akin to the hordes of humanoids that appeared from the ponds of black liquid in the world of the living. Could this mean that these are all souls of the dead that have been summoned from Purgatory into the real world by the Lovecraftian interdimensional beings? Seems like a real possibility. Going back to Purgatory, the camera then gradually pans down to reveal something rather bizarre, a whale that is swimming upside down. As a matter of fact, if you look closely, you will notice that all the fish here are swimming upside down as well. The implications of this are pretty interesting. If we flip the footage vertically to match this perspective, the way things behave in this world actually starts to make a little more sense. For example, I found it rather strange that we were seeing heavy objects like corpses and rocks floating upwards when they should be sinking downwards. Now, I'm fully aware that human corpses eventually build up gas and end up floating back up in the long run, but starting out, once water fills a human corpse's lungs, they sink. Another heavy object that definitely should be sinking and not floating upwards is this bridge's pickup truck. But if we flip the footage vertically, the truck behaves more naturally and actually looks like it's sinking, and the fish are actually right side up like they should be. But then the strange part becomes that where the sky should be is the ground, and where the ground should be is the sky. Up is down and down is up. But hey, welcome to Purgatory. I guess things just work differently here than the way they do in the world of the living. Now, intriguingly, we witness the exact same bizarre physics in the world of the living when that colossal Lovecraftian creature appeared, during which heavy objects like rocks, human bodies, and the pickup truck started floating upwards. Now, at a glance, it just looks like gravity shifting weirdly, but perhaps what was actually happening here is that these objects began sinking as the world of Purgatory started bleeding into the world of the living. Just look at what happens when we rotate this footage by 180 degrees. The puddle of black liquid suddenly looks like the surface of an ocean, and it provides the illusion that we are now underwater. From there, objects no longer look like they're floating, but rather like they're sinking, and this imagery suddenly makes a lot more sense. As for why Purgatory is crossing over into the world of the living, your guess is as good as mine, though I'm willing to bet that this colossal creature planting its umbilical cords and strands into the earth has a part to play in all this. At the very least, one thing I feel is becoming clearer and clearer is that these interdimensional beings aren't crossing over from a higher dimension as I once believed, but rather from an alternate dimension, the world of the dead. It's less like the movie Interstellar and its fifth dimension and whatnot, and more like the TV show Stranger Things and how there's a real world and then the upside down. In Death Stranding's case, I believe that the upside down in this world is Purgatory. Moving on, as the pickup truck sinks upwards, towards the right side here is that fire extinguisher that we saw before, but something's different now. Whereas the canister was bright red in the world of the living, now for some reason it's devoid of all color. This isn't the only object that suffers this effect either. The triangular center of this dream catcher, for example, was yellow in the world of the living, but it's grayed out in Purgatory. Same thing goes for the baby doll lying next to Norman, which should have a skin type of color, but is instead a monochromatic gray. As a matter of fact, if we go back and zoom out, it's possible to see that very little in Purgatory has any color to it. The only exceptions are things surrounding Sam's unconscious corporeal body, like the nearby coral reefs, the nearby light refraction that form into small rainbows, the equipment that Sam's dormant body is wearing, and Sam himself. You almost get the sense that the only sign of life in the vastness of Purgatory is Sam and his vicinity, though why he seems to get special treatment in this world is still a complete mystery. While we're looking at Sam here, I would like to draw your attention to the baby doll lying next to him. My belief is that the doll is the remaining husk of the baby in the incubator who perished in the explosion alongside Norman. It's the only conclusion I can draw, since otherwise the baby would be unaccounted for. This theory can be further corroborated by the way Norman and the baby doll are situated exactly the same way as how we see them in the first trailer, so the doll is clearly being symbolically represented as the actual baby. So perhaps the implication here is that any time the baby dies, it leaves behind a baby doll husk. Assuming this is true, could this mean that the baby doll seen in the second trailer represents the location in which someone and their baby died? Maybe baby dolls will be part of a Dark Souls-like mechanic in which death locations are marked throughout the world of Death Stranding. Maybe as you explore the world, you'll find these baby dolls occasionally, and they may represent a location in which you died, or maybe a location in which you and your baby died, or maybe a location in which other players and their babies died. One last thing I need to talk about before moving on are these two black strands that are attached to Norman's belly, from which a strange black smoke or diluting black liquid is spilling from. If we follow the strands all the way up, you can see that they are one of the many pairs of strands falling from the sky. I tried to follow the other ones, but they all head to locations that are too distant to make anything out. But judging by how one of these strand pairs is connected to Sam's unconscious body, I can only surmise that the others connect to other unconscious bodies as well. As for who those other bodies are, I can think of three possibilities. They could be other characters in the world who died and who may also have the ability to reincarnate. They could all be dead Sams from a player's past deaths, or they could be dead Sams of other players. Regardless of what we may find if we follow these strands, I get the sense that it somehow plays into the exploration element of Purgatory. Kojima confirmed that players will be able to explore in first person outside of Sam's body and find items among other things. Perhaps part of that involves following these strands falling from the sky and seeing what they lead to and what you find there. Perhaps inspecting these areas in first-person ethereal form will allow players to find loot or check out what circumstances led to a corpse's death, whether the corpse belongs to another character, the player Sam from a previous death, or another player Sam from their deaths. I don't know, there are a lot of potential theories for this one. But one thing that all of these strand pairs seem to have in common is that whatever they're attached to are unaffected by the pull of this world's upside-down gravity. Whereas we see things like the mannequin-like Black Soul corpses sinking with no strings attached, Sam and others linked to these strand pairs remain planted to the ground, or is it the ceiling? Whatever. These strands almost seem to act like a lifeline, perhaps to separate those who can reincarnate into the world of the living once more and those who cannot. With all that out of the way, we can finally talk about this moment right here, where we see the camera enter Sam's mouth and into his esophagus to reveal that, surprise, there's a freaking baby there, because why not? Now, Kojima did mention in his recent interview with IGN that once players want to return to the world of the living from Purgatory, all they have to do is get back into Sam's body, like a soul re-entering its vessel. So that's probably what we're looking at here, the player getting back into Sam's body in ethereal form, after which the baby inside gives you a playful thumbs up to say, yay. I see Kojima hasn't lost his quirky sense of humor. Before we get out of here, there are a couple things to note. First, check out all of these baby-sized handprints littered throughout this fleshy wall. I guess if we go by how handprints appear on Sam's body anytime he dies, maybe baby handprints appear inside Norman's body anytime the baby dies. Or perhaps the handprints are a representation of the baby climbing back inside Norman, seemingly as part of the reincarnation ritual? I don't know, if you have a better theory, I'd love to hear it. Second thing to note is the color of the baby's eyes, which are brown like the baby seen in the second trailer, which implies that they're one and the same person. Kojima also confirmed this in his recent interview with IGN, when asked whether the baby washed up ashore in the first trailer, the one in the incubator in the second trailer, and this one in Sam's esophagus in the third trailer were the same. Kojima said yes. Now, one popular theory is that this baby is Sam's child, but Sam has blue eyes, not brown. There's a genetic discrepancy indicating that they may not be biologically related at all, but there is clearly some other form of deep affinity between the two that goes beyond biology. They are both somehow connected to each other in life and death. Alright, that's everything, so we can finally get out of here. As the camera zooms back out of Sam's esophagus, we are taken back to the world of the living. It seems to be the very same landscape we saw before, except it's now daytime, the fog is all gone, and the timefall rain has dissipated. After Sam comes to, he proceeds to vomit black liquid alongside these strange critters. Now this right here, ladies and gentlemen, may be the biggest clue yet as to what the nature of the black liquid is. My theory is that the black liquid is purgatory water that has crossed into the world of the living. Water that for some reason looks clear in purgatory but looks gross and black in the world of the living. I believe that what we're seeing here is Sam coughing up residue of purgatory water that got into his lungs from the time he spent underwater for an extended period of time, like a man coughing up water after being resuscitated from drowning. Another big clue are these little bug critters that Sam vomited, which can also be seen floating near Sam's unconscious body in purgatory. It seems as though when Sam returned to the world of the living, some of these nearby critters crossed with him as well, along with some purgatory water that transformed from clear to black liquid. If we assume that the black liquid is in fact purgatory water as seen in the world of the living, a number of long-standing questions can be answered. Why do these spectral handprints leave behind black liquid? Perhaps because these interdimensional creatures come from the underwater world of purgatory, so when they cross over and take a step into the world of the living, some of purgatory's water seeps over as well. Think of it as someone who just got out of the pool and is leaving behind wet prints everywhere as they walk around, except the pool is purgatory, and any water that gets out of the pool and into the world of the living comes out black for some reason. Where do all of the dead crabs and sea creatures we have seen in Death Stranding trailers keep coming from? Well, we saw that many living sea creatures inhabit the underwater world of purgatory, so perhaps we're dealing with mass strandings between two realms. Maybe we're witnessing sea creatures being washed up ashore, not from sea to land, but from purgatory to the land of the living, as the line between the two dimensions or realms becomes blurred. Similarly, in purgatory, we might be witnessing creatures from the world of the living being washed ashore or stranded in purgatory. Next question, why does this mummified corpse turn into black liquid? Perhaps he isn't turning into black liquid, but rather a rift between the realm of the living and purgatory is causing purgatory's water to leak out while the corpse sinks from the world of the living and crosses over to purgatory. In my eyes, the mummified corpse looks less like it's liquefying and more like it's sinking, like the water is acting like a portal. From what I've seen in this trailer, anywhere there's black liquid seems to be a portal from which purgatory creatures can appear from and interact with the world of the living. Maybe that's why a puddle of purgatory water forms underneath the injured man before these souls or whatever can cross over to hold this guy down. And this black liquid portal seems quite flexible as well. At one point we see this puddle dragging itself along the ground, and in another instance, we see mats flooding the area with the black liquid as if to expand the portal that bridges the two worlds. The more I think of the black liquid as residue water from purgatory crossing over, and the more I think of the black liquid as a bridge or portal between their world and ours, the more I feel like I can kind of make sense of certain things. And now, with Sam vomiting black liquid along with these purgatory critters, as if a bit of purgatory crossed to the real world with Sam, maybe I'm onto something with this. Speaking of the critters, there's a brief and weird moment where they seemingly start walking upwards in midair, but if we consider how the bizarre physics from Purgatory can meld with the world of the living like it happened before, then it's possible to make some sense of this. I don't think these critters are walking, I think they're swimming, identically to how they were swimming in Purgatory. So what these critters swimming in midair in the world of the living tells me is that there is still some residual crossover between the two worlds. From there, as Sam finally gets up, we are given a good look at the baby incubator, the white umbilical cord hanging from it, detached from the body of one of the bridge's crew members, and Sam's black umbilical cord looping from the C-mount device into the flap of his protective suit. We can also see that the mechanical arm is now deactivated, suggesting that there are no threats nearby. Then, as the camera pans towards the incubator, it's possible to make out another Easter egg, a Luden's keychain modeled after the Nendroid Luden's figurine. Now what's curious about this is that the keychain wasn't there before, it only appeared after Sam returned from Purgatory. So perhaps this has something to do with how you can explore Purgatory in first person and recover items along the way. Perhaps this keychain is among the items that you can find in Purgatory. One more thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the label on Sam's arm sleeve, which says VT Arm Protector EXR 145500371. It doesn't really look like these sequences of numbers and letters mean all that much from where I'm sitting, but if you think this is some kind of clue, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. The trailer then cuts to a close-up of Sam's face, and once more, we see tears spontaneously rolling down his eye, although the situation doesn't call for it. Now, one interesting detail is that before the tear rolls, you can see what look to be trails of tear residue, seemingly left behind by previous occasions like this. There is a trail for both the left eye and the right eye, and as one of Sam's tears rolls down, you can see that it follows the trail exactly. This is one of those things that has me stumped. I have no idea what the tears mean, what they are in reaction to, or what's triggering it. This is another one of those mysteries for another time. Which finally brings us to the final shot of the trailer. As the camera pans back, we are once again greeted by the 5 monolithic figures, a scene very reminiscent of the final shot in the first trailer. But this time a couple other things stand out as well, starting with a giant crater here. This was undoubtedly the result of the giant Lovecraftian creature we saw earlier exploding. You can even see what remains of it smeared across the crater in a giant scatter of black liquid, which I'm going to assume is purgatory water. One of the things that the crater is meant to highlight is that Death Stranding will acknowledge your failures, and the consequences of these failures will persist throughout the rest of the game. As Kojima said in his interview with IGN, quote, "So as you saw in the trailer, you saw the crater, and when you come back, it's still there. Most games would have taken you back to before the crater was made. So depending on the player, you might have a lot of craters all over the place. Depends on each player. Death will never pull you out of the game." Interestingly, Kojima mentions the possibility that we might see many of these craters, suggesting that this might not be the only time that we'll face exploding Lovecraftian colossi. It looks like there will be more instances like this in which if players fail, they will reincarnate but come back to find a huge scar left on the game world. Something else that stands out in this shot are the strands streaming down from the sky. Much like the strands we saw before the explosion and in Purgatory, these strands also seem to be grouped up in pairs. Now, in Purgatory, we saw that one of these pairs of strands was connected to Sam's dead body, and I surmise that the other pairs of strands scattered about are probably connected to the corpses of other characters or maybe even other Sams. So perhaps the same theory applies here. Maybe where these strands dig into the ground also mark the location of players' previous deaths. We saw that Sam was already marked with a couple of handprints before his latest death, suggesting that he's already died a couple times, so it's possible that these strand pairs are showing us where some of these deaths might have happened. As for why these strands come in pairs, perhaps one is for Sam and the other is for the baby. The last thing left to analyze are the 5 monolithic beings, whose features are much more prominent since this trailer is in 4K, whereas the first trailer was only in 1080p. Looking at them, there is no question that they are humanoid in nature. I don't know if I would go as far as to calling them human, but they are certainly human in shape and form. Aside from that though, these beings are as enigmatic as ever, but here's something to consider. Remember how I talked about the possibility that mats may be a representation of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife, the underworld, the dead, and of transition, resurrection, and regeneration? Well, what's interesting about Osiris is that he had 4 other siblings: Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus. Isis was both Osiris's sister and wife, and while she's not really known as the goddess of something specific, she's often associated with protection and healing. Set, who killed Osiris to obtain his throne, was the god of the desert, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners. Nephthys was both Set's sister and wife, and she's often seen as the mirror image of Isis, so she too is often associated with protection and healing. Finally, Horus the Great is often known as the sky god of ancient Egypt, usually portrayed as a falcon. Now, whether any of this has any bearing on Death Stranding's story or the nature of these monolithic beings remains to be seen. But it's worth noting that Kojima has borrowed stories from ancient texts in the past to inspire character relationships in his own stories. For example, the story of Solid Snake, aka David, and Liquid Snake, aka Eli, and that whole contentious relationship was taken straight out of the Bible story of David and Eliab, 2 of Jesse's 8 children. So I wouldn't put it past Kojima to at least be inspired by obscure ancient stories and lore. Thus, we finally come to the conclusion of this trailer analysis as Sam finishes his dialogue about how the 4th explosion is one that will be our last.
And then came the next explosion. An explosion that will be our last.
If the first explosion was the Big Bang, the second one was the Theia Impact, and the third one was the Cambrian explosion, I can only surmise that the 4th one will have something to do with the realm of purgatory, the world of the dead, bleeding into the world of the living. I feel like that much seems like a consistent theme throughout this trailer. But of course, these are just my thoughts and theories, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about all this in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this Death Stranding trailer analysis. Thank you for tuning in. If you made it all the way to the end, congratulations, and I hope you got something out of this video that I worked on for weeks. And if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon to help this channel stay independent and self-sustained. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.